Hello guys, and welcome to another amazing video uploaded by your host, MudPup50, otherwise known as the coolest YouTuber with under 10 subs. This week I have an exciting video where I debate the top 5 gaming franchises of all time. Imagine that. I'm ignoring franchises which are basically one game. Pac-Man, Tetris, being as that'd be a really sucky video, being as because of their impact, they'd have to be number 1 or number 2. They'd have to be here. Factors I'm considering are sales, legacy, and the impact on modern gaming. I'll save you the time because everybody knows who number 1's going to be. It's Mario. That way, if you've stumbled on this video and you really want to know who number 1 is, it's Mario. You can leave. Everybody knows it's going to be Mario. And of course, with a video like this, I want to start with some honorable mentions, being as there are quite a few franchises I just couldn't include. I wanted to, couldn't do it. Sonic, I wanted to include so bad, being as he helped keep Sega competitive, but sadly there was no room. Rock Band or Guitar Hero, whichever you prefer, for actually popularizing the music gaming genre. Grand Theft Auto for really pushing the salmonella envelope for what games could be, really helping define the sandbox games in general. The Madden franchise for really establishing the sports gaming genre and starting the yearly rehash of baseball, football, basketball, soccer, wrestling games, which leads to another juggernaut game that gets rehashed every year, Call of Duty, which in itself truly connects to my number 5 for this week, Halo. Before I go, let me say that I am not a Halo fanboy, but it has earned its spot on here. Halo is, in my opinion, a big enough trendsetter to earn this spot. Think about all the quote-unquote gamers you know. How many of them spend all the time playing games online? Playing Call of Duty or Battlefield or Halo. Now, how many of these people are playing their first-person shooters? I know Halo wasn't the first first-person shooter. I would never claim it was. But it is the game that redefined what a multiplayer first-person shooter could be. And this video will be filled with assumptions like this. So, yeah, ass, you, me. I know how the expression goes. But I think we can safely assume that without Halo, the entire landscape of popular games today would be entirely different. Think about how many first-person shooters are coming out this year. Also add in the fact that we could argue that there'd be no COD without Halo. And you're looking at an entirely different world of video games. Looking at numbers, Halo 3 sold more than $170 million worth of copies in the first 24 hours of release, which coincidentally broke the record set by Halo 2. Halo Reach, in turn, broke the record set by Halo 3, selling 200 million copies worth on its first day of release. Then Halo 4 broke Halo Reach's record on its opening day by grossing 220 million. The games have sold over 50 million copies worldwide, grossing almost 3.4 billion. Let me reiterate, I am not a Halo fanboy at all. These are facts. They are numbers. You can find them yourself. They are real numbers. Call of Duty hit its biggest stride in popularity with Modern Warfare, otherwise known Call of Duty 4, which was released in 2007. Halo 2 was online having matches in 2004. I prefer Call of Duty, but these are the facts. Anyway, my number 4, we have my second favorite franchise ever, the Holy Trinity itself, The Legend of Zelda. Some of my earliest memories are of this series, and really, who can blame me? A lot of people would argue the best game ever is Link to the Past. Then you have people who say Ocarina of Time is. You can't argue the impact this series has just had on gaming. The original game being so open, rewarding you for exploring randomly. Multiple dungeons that were actually dungeons, not worlds. Multiple items, a save system. And then in my opinion, Link to the Past perfects these ideas into what is one of the perfect packages. Not to mention the Z-target system from Ocarina of Time. All of the new ideas are great, but let's also assume wildly, being as that's what I'm going to do in this video. Nintendo versus Sega. Maybe I should make a point before shutting up. You can argue that Mario and Sonic, the biggest franchise by their respective company, were about equal in popularity during the Nintendo and Sega wars. That means what pushed Nintendo over the edge is its secondary franchises, which at this point included Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Donkey Kong Country, etc., etc. So we could argue that without games like Zelda and a few other key franchises, Nintendo would have had to shut down today. Or at least it wouldn't be as important as it is now. Which also means, most likely, no motion controls, no popular handheld, and debatably, and I know I'm stretching here, phone gaming would be even bigger than it is now. Because think about if there was no handheld gaming, what would people be doing? They'd be playing it on their phone. So, I know it's all a stretch, but I think that's what makes this video fun for me, personally. And in terms of sales, the games aren't a slouch. As of 2011, the series has sold over 67 million copies. And I'm apologizing for using a 3-year-old stat, but Bing isn't good at finding series stats for the Zelda games, instead telling me how many copies of Link Between Worlds got sold, over 400,000 in November, and that the Legend of Zelda prototype sold for $55,000. Interesting stuff, but not exactly what I'm looking for. Back to the subject. Lots of Zelda games have been sold without a doubt. It has impacted gaming immensely. Ask a non-gamer to name 5 video game characters, and I can almost assure you one of the characters will be Link/Zelda, being of course that everyone thinks Zelda is the main character because people just don't know. Though, the numbers can make you sad. Not hating on PewDiePie, but he has around 27 million subs. The highest selling Zelda game has sold 8.1 million copies, according to VGCharts.com. So, point of that being, PewDiePie is more famous than any one Zelda game. Wow. For number 7, we have the legendary behemoth, the Iron Giant of gaming, the Final Fantasy series. Before I get started talking about why it's here, I played 7, 8, 9, 10, 10-2, and I think it was 12. I don't know, the game didn't stick. So by no means am I a Final Fantasy expert. Also consider, I was born in 1994, so I don't know exactly how gaming has evolved over time. So, bear with me. If I'm wrong, comment and tell me how it went down, because I'd really, genuinely love to hear from some viewers. Sorry for going off on that sally. The Final Fantasy series is one of the most extensive game series ever. Off the top of my head, I can only think of 3 franchises that have more games. Mario, sports games, and Mega Man games. Sit on that for a second. But I'm not. Final Fantasy games are without a doubt the most well-received RPG games in America. I think they're technically JRPGs. I'm losing my focus here. Think back to some of the earliest RPGs you can remember. Personally, the first one I can remember is Final Fantasy VII. Nowadays, aspects of RPGs have taken over gaming. You level up on just about every game. Sports games, you raise your stats. Shooters have you leveling up and unlocking new weapons. Even The Sims take features from RPGs. And the biggest RPG series is Final Fantasy. Think about amazing stories in games. A Final Fantasy game will be on your list. Think immersive worlds. A Final Fantasy will be on your list. Badass characters. Big plot twist. Any aspect of gaming, a Final Fantasy game has done amazingly. Final Fantasy games show you what gaming can be. People view gaming as a joke. They debate if it's art. They'll call every single movie out this year art. Okay? But they won't call gaming art. Final Fantasy games are the epitome of what games can be. Now, time to insert some history into this. Back in the early to mid-90s, Nintendo and Sega had the greatest console war of all time. As you follow it to the tail end of the fight, Sony pops up. The PlayStation was selling approximately 13 to 14 million copies before 97. Why do I stop at 97, you ask? Because that is when Final Fantasy VII came out in North America. Immediately, the sale numbers jump from 9 million in 96 to 19.3 million in 97. Keep in mind, those are numbers of total consoles sold. That is the number of new PlayStations people were buying. So 19 million people got a PlayStation in 1997. Globally, Final Fantasy VII sold 9.72 million copies. Final Fantasy VIII sold 7.86 million copies in 99. You could argue that the Final Fantasy series helped push Sony so far ahead of Nintendo. Fun trivia for today. The original PlayStation was the first console to ever sell 100 million copies. Sony has pretty much, without a few bumps here and there, dominated the market since then. Without Final Fantasy, Sony might not be as big a powerhouse as it is now. Again, I'm making claims you can't really back up with facts. So that leads me to number 2, which is, of course, Pokemon. I'm sure some of my bias is factored into this because it is my favorite franchise, but we can also use facts and speculation to prove me right. Let me start by saying, who hasn't heard of a Pikachu? Granted, that doesn't prove anything as far as video games go, being as Pokemon has a TV show, like 15 movies, the game series, comics, pretty much anything you could imagine Pokemon has done. Which, granted, other series have tried to do, but none has done it to the level Pokemon has. I mean, look at the Legend of Zelda cartoon. Not to mention the insane amount of connectivity Pokemon has. What game from the 90s encouraged you to trade with your friends? The fact that they are a handheld series just helped boost the success even more. You could go to school and sit on the playground and play Pokemon. Your friends might pull out theirs and play too. Not to mention, even the original Pokemon games had 151 characters you could control. Even now, you don't have that many in most other games. I mean, Pokemon has sold 245 million games as a franchise, only behind number 1, the Mario franchise. Granted, I know this number is inflating a bit, being as the games typically come out in pairs, like Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, etc. But still, Red, Green, and Blue globally sold 31.3 million copies. I mean, I know when I grew up, Pokemon was widely played and talked about. Speculation time. The best-selling Game Boy game, which I feel is a pretty widely known stat, is Tetris. But it had a 9-year gap where there was no Pokemon games. You could debate that Pokemon helped jumpstart multiplayer gaming. We can debate that without Pokemon, handheld gaming would have collapsed. I mean, think of an original handheld series that started in the 90s. Started as an actually existed in the 90s, not somebody thought of the idea in the 90s. It was there in the 90s. So if handheld gaming would have collapsed, debatably, smartphone gaming would be even bigger than it is now. If you view handheld gaming separately from console gaming, you could argue that the Pokemon franchise is the most important franchise in the history of handhelds. Of course, we all know I'm jumping to conclusions. Great segue time. See, there was another huge franchise on the Game Boy that would have most likely helped it stay afloat, which is number 1, which, as I've mentioned twice now, is Mario. I'm pretty certain that at least 90% of people can recognize Mario, at least if they don't live in a third world country, because they would have no way to know. I mean, how many people have a relative who actually remembers console gaming strictly as Mario? You cannot overstate how big of an impact Mario has had in gaming today. Would modern gaming exist without him? I mean, think about it. Without Mario, Nintendo might not have ever succeeded in the gaming market. With no Nintendo, would Sega have pushed so hard? Would gaming in general recover from the video game crash of 1983? So much of this video has been speculation, but this isn't too far from being fact. Gaming should have been done after the crash, but it didn't die. Someone held all console gaming on his back as he jumped on Goomba's heads and saved his stupid princess, and that was Mario. Let's look at the numbers. Mario games have sold more than 445 million copies. That is almost 500 million. To put that into perspective, Call Me Maybe had less views a year ago than total purchase of Mario games. Purchases, mind you. That's a YouTube view. I really don't think I have to explain why Mario is here. Of course, though, people will disagree. I had to leave off quite a few classic franchises, and my bias probably shows when I make so many outlandish claims. So I'm more than willing to read your comments and your thoughts on this, because I do read and comment back to every comment. If you're still here, there's no harm in leaving a like or a comment. So anyway, peace out, home skillets.